Hello, thank you. Okay, so you can hear me well, okay? Okay, thank you very much. Today, I want to talk about improvisation, surprise, surprise. But rather than discuss the act of improvisation as an outwardly expressed event, as performers or listeners, I want to concentrate on the genesis of improvisation, the inception of that creative impulse anterior to its instantiation, before what Heidegger calls the unconcealing of the tacit inner knowledges that form the kernels of all artistic expression. To do this, we have to focus on human consciousness, as this acts as the portal for all human activity. Consciousness is, of course, a notoriously difficult terrain, the complexity of which still evades the greatest of neuroscientific minds. While tremendous advancements in research have extended considerably our understanding of consciousness, there are still extensive regions of the mind that will never be known or understood through objective research and analysis. On the other hand, there is much we know from our own lived experiences of the world. We harness within us vast landscapes of inner feelings, perceptions, and cognitions, significantly often at a pre-linguistic level, that while they can never be proven on any rational, verifiable basis, we know to be true and meaningful to us. This distinction between what we know inside and what can be known from objective investigation is one that has existed for quite some time. Indeed, as modes of knowledge inquiry, they've been traditionally held in a dichotomous relationship to each other. They appear in ancient Greek thought in the opposing terms. There we go. In the opposing terms of techne and episteme, as we heard earlier in a paper. While the former was associated with the domain of art and craft, the latter was seen as a study of theory or knowledge. Thus, techne may be seen as knowledge gained from doing and from being, while episteme can be viewed as knowledge gained from objective, rational inquiry. All these distinct modes of knowledge inquiry were subsumed into the European Enlightenment. They were further subjected to distinctions of hierarchy. For historical reasons, which include the way the institutionalization of knowledge in universities evolved from the early Renaissance, modes of investigation and research that developed in the Enlightenment favored scientific, verifiable methodologies over embedded knowledge systems. This Cartesian predilection for objectification is exemplified by two categories of epistemology formulated by the German philosopher Alexander Baumgarten. Aesthetic and productive knowledges were relegated to gnoseologia inferior, a science dealing with what came to be considered as the lower faculties of knowledge and which contrasted with the gnoseologia superior, the higher faculties of logic-based knowledge. These structural biases in modes of knowledge inquiry are still embedded within most of our modern educational institutions. Indeed, in this late capitalist moment, the close relationship between the academy and industry has further bolstered methods of research that more immediately address the requirements of the economy and the digital ecosystem, while knowledges gained through artistic practices are deemed to have little role to play in the development of progressive technologies. Against this strong tide, however, an emergent insight into the value of embedded knowledges has gained increasing traction in the academy. Thomas Kuhn's 1960s paradigm shift in rethinking the structures of so-called objective knowledge prized open cracks in science's infallibilism that led to more nuanced comprehensions of the way we see and interpret the world. Similarly, quantum physics acknowledges the necessity of including the observer and the process of observation in order to have a full understanding of the observed. These insights have opened new ground where subjective modes of knowledge inquiry have been given more space to be articulated and appreciated. My work as a performer, composer, improviser, writer, and educator attempts to harness my artistic practice-led research to complement and augment perspectives supported by theoretical positions. Many of my conclusions here are the result of autopoietic observation, and as you will hear, I also lean on a number of philosophical theories and perspectives. However, I need to add to this a further element that has greatly influenced my research. I have been practicing Transcendental Meditation, or TM, for 40 years, and for 30 years I've been a practitioner of the Advanced TM City program. These essentially neurophysiological and holistic meditation practices, which have their foundation in the ancient Vedic tradition, have given me significant insights both intellectually and experientially into the workings of consciousness. My propositions here are thus supported by my ongoing work as a creative performing musician, the harnessing of a number of theoretical frameworks, and a lifetime experience of transcendental meditation and the TM City program. It is with this perhaps unusual triplicity of approaches that I investigate the nature of improvisation. What I wish to tease out here is a clearer understanding of what processes are at play when we play. And while the practice of improvisation is, I believe, significant for human activities at all its practice levels, I'm thinking, for example, of improvisation as a risk-free creativity activity for children, or as a means of augmenting pedagogical possibilities. I'm particularly focusing here on what happens when we enact improvisation at the executive level, when we dance, play, or conceive improvisationally at the highest peaks. What happens at this moment that catches us by surprise, when we create something that we thought was not possible technically, or beyond what we thought were the limits of our artistic vision or reach? What happens to our consciousness at these moments, or what is our consciousness enacting in us? These are the questions I'm attempting to address here, tentatively. It is through our consciousness that we see the world and act and engage with others in it. Everyone experiences consciousness at different levels. Sleep and the waking state are two common examples. However, through my practice of transcendental meditation, I've become aware of other states of consciousness. And it is at this understanding of the differentiated states of consciousness that drew my attention to the theory of Umwelt as proposed by Jakob von Uexküll and developed by others such as Helmut Plessner, Ernst Cassirer, Thomas Seebuck, and not least by my Middlesex University colleague, Professor Paul Cobley, a leading voice in semiotic and cyber-semiotic studies, whose writings have been important in the formation of my own ideas. With Uexküll's biosemiotic model, all living forms communicate by use of Umwelten, or milieus, each in accordance with its specific set of sensing tools, or sensoria. An Umwelt, therefore, may be seen as the set of resources by which we understand our perceived reality and its signs, inasmuch as this is materially possible by the limits and reach of our sensoria. This notion of Umwelt can be more clearly understood when we consider the various and distinct modes by which we can know our surroundings. For example, objects that are far away are sight objects, a little closer, and they may become hearing objects, then perhaps touch objects. Finally, we may consume them as taste objects. Uexküll's Umwelt theory presents a radical rethinking of the functionalities of all living beings, ranging from so-called lower life forms such as ticks or scallops to more sophisticated animals such as dogs, that runs contrary to the Darwinian historicist evolutionist model. Rather than understanding the world as a universal physical arena akin to some vast Roman Colosseum where the struggle for existence takes place, Uexküll proposes that living beings are perfectly harmonized with the environment because they are already habituated to the perceptual marks that correspond to them in it. This presupposes that living beings are not mere prisoners of animal tropism, reflex conditional physiological mechanisms that react chemically to stimulants within the environment, but are rather beings endowed with subjectivity, sensitivities, and perceptions, attributes that constitute their engagement with the environment through the formation of an Umwelt. In place of a one-world physicalist view on life, Uexküll's Umwelt theory acknowledges the presence in nature of a myriad of unique and distinct perception worlds. While this notion of subjectivity would imply shared attributes with humans, a central characteristic of Uexküll's Umwelt model clearly separates the non-human animal world from the human perspective. According to Uexküll, there is no beyond Umwelt for non-human life forms. As he states, the soap bubble of a given Umwelt constitutes for the animal the limit of what it is for it finite, and therewith the limit of its world. What lies behind that is hidden in infinity. Each environment forms a self-enclosed unit which is governed in all its parts by its meaning for the subject. Inasmuch as the subjectivity of a non-human animal can be considered as its consciousness, the limits and latitudes of that consciousness are circumscribed by the animal's Umwelt. It is at this point that distinctions between non-human animal Umwelten and human Umwelten can be clearly made. For me, one of the most fascinating aspects of understanding human communication within the context of Umwelt theory is the added notion that alongside this materialist functioning in which humans participate, it is the uniquely human ability to anticipate. George Steiner has articulated a fundamental attribute of humans that distinguishes them from all other animals. It is our ability, philosophically or artistically, to imagine the day after our death. This adds to the set of biologically centered sensoria, the tools of perception we utilize within our Umwelten, a uniquely sophisticated and transcendental element. While animals are trapped within their confined instinctive modes, we can project futurities in which we no longer exist. We can create fictions that tell of nobody we know, and we can present ethical propositions to be shared or rejected by others. It is this very aspect of human potential, this transcendental propensity to expand upon the fundamentally materialist model of the Umwelt, which forms the basis of my arguments regarding the performative improvised moment. Uexküll has been central to our understanding that all living forms are perceiving subjects. Earlier, Immanuel Kant already proposed that the human is a conceptual subject, or homo rationis. Current investigations in quantum physics, intriguingly echoing long-established Vedic philosophy, now proposes the human as a transcendental subject, or what could be called homo transcendentalis. This transcendental capacity of human consciousness is exemplified in David Bohm's proposition of 3 orders, which constitute the basis of quantum physics. The explicate order, characterized by local particle interaction causality. The implicate order, defined by non-locality and interdependence. And the super-implicate order, in which the first 2 orders exist in a universal plenum. This unified field theory thus proposes a non-dualistic model that can be observed in an intimately cognate triplicity. Explicate or gross level, implicate or subtle level, and the super-implicate or transcendent level. Cognitive psychologist Robert Dwyer finds comparisons between Bohm's unified field theory and the Vedic proposition that reality is subject to different states of consciousness. At surface levels of understanding and experience, object and subject are independent. At deeper levels, they are more interdependent, and most fundamentally, no thing is independent because all things are ultimately unified in the unified field. These levels of nature relate to the primary locus of experience in different states of consciousness. Hence, Vedic proponent Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's elucidation that knowledge is different in different states of consciousness. This revised notion of Umwelt as a non-fixed domain of human consciousness dislocates it from its original Uxkullian conception as a biologically framed and thus bounded proposition. Discoveries in quantum physics accord with Vedic philosophy and allow for an innovative repositioning of Umwelt, not as a fixed boundary to human consciousness, but rather as necessarily responsive and adaptive to the ability of human consciousness to operate at different levels. This brings us back to the difference highlighted earlier regarding the 2 distinct modes of knowledge inquiry, the embedded mode of techne and the objective rational mode of episteme. Recalling Kuhn's paradigm shift within the context of my revision of Umwelt as a non-fixed domain of human consciousness, it is clear that even so-called logical, objective procedures are anchored in the consciousness of the subject. In any case, much of what is integral to artistic aesthetic discourse is not analysable. This, however, does not and should not disprove its truth values. After all, consciousness is anterior to analysis. What I'm attempting to propose here is a renewed appreciation of techne as an embedded mode of knowledge inquiry that will more likely illuminate our understanding of the instant of creative inception and its relation to consciousness. To further explore this, I would like to make some interconnections between Hegel's interrogations into inception, the first things, where nichts becomes into etwas, where nichts means complete emptiness, absence of all determination and content, undifferentiated in itself, and etwas stands for something, something measurable, something instantiated. Hegel's unmediated being correlates to recent discoveries, as I've said, in particle physics, identifying elemental entities that have no dimension or mass. This is the unified field from which something is to emerge, and Hegel's Aufgang proceeds towards being in that it negates or sublates non-being. This is a key exemplar of Hegelian dialectics. The negation of nothing creates the emergence of something, of being. This concept of Hegelian sublation is mirrored in Vedic philosophy, where a developmental model for the emergence of thought and speech from the absolute to the utter is presented in 4 stages, starting at the deepest level and moving upwards. Para, the silent transcendental level of speech. Pashyanti, the finest feeling level of speech. Madhyama, the mental level of speech, and Bakari, the sensory level of spoken speech, the gross level of that thought. The Vedic mapping of the inception of the silent transcendental field of thought into speech correlates closely to Hegelian sublation, as we have seen. But Hegel underlines that what forms and animates this inception cannot be analysed. However, key texts by Hegel's direct contemporary, the poet and philosopher Friedrich Hölderlin, do offer fascinating insights into this moment of sublation. In his essay entitled Concerning the Modes and Means of the Proceeding of the Poetic Spirit, and in his novel Hyperion, Hölderlin makes profound observations regarding the conflict between the limitless nature of the creative spirit, or Geist, and the necessary circumscriptions that all artistic and aesthetic forms impose upon it. Great art, Hölderlin argues, proceeds out of a dialectic tension. While the inception and emergence of unbounded creative spirit is enclosed within the confines of poetic forms, the impulse towards a universal articulation transcendentalizes this confinement. Hölderlin characterizes the function of art as the making present of the unbounded. This chimes with Maharishi's Vedic perspective regarding the great works of art, which he states are those whose expressions have succeeded in containing in very great magnitude the total value of life from the surface to the depth, and usually without losing sight of the transcendent, which alone gives a character of wholeness to them. This transcendental phenomenon of the inception of unbounded creative intelligence emerging into aesthetic form and articulation is, I propose, the most significant means to understanding the act of artistic creation. I want to go further and discuss this transcendental phenomenon more precisely in relation to music and its articulation through improvised performance. As I've mentioned, both Hegel and Hölderlin speak of the tensions created when the poetic Geist is encoded in specific formal constructions or genres. The sonnet in poetry, the fugue in music, the quasi in ballet. I wish to make a specific case for music's essentially metaphoric nature, keeping in mind Thomas Mann's proposition that music is ambiguity as a system, and further discuss improvisation and its special position, as I see it, in the transcendental process of emergent creativity, which I have been outlining. Schopenhauer's suggestion that music exhibits itself as the metaphysical to everything physical in the world gives to music, as a mode of human creative expression, a unique position. I mentioned earlier the 4 stages of development in the emergence of thought and speech as proposed by Vedic philosophy. Maharishi proposes that the unfoldment of self into the field of speech is sequential. Consciousness becomes quantified as sounds. From sound, form is generated. While the point being made is centered on the emergence of speech, it is fully pertinent to the unfolding of musical form in human creative consciousness. Indeed, it's more applicable to music, as pure sound is pre-linguistic and thus articulates itself at a point in the temporal unfolding of the creative impulse prior to the unavoidable confinement the rational demands of language would impose upon sound. In this sense, music's relative abstraction and metaphoric quality mean that within the temporal unfolding of the creative artistic Geist, it resides closer to the originary instant of the creative impulse, closer, as it were, to the point of unmediated being. This has significant implications for music's role within consciousness, and I will return later to discuss how music may expand the human Umwelt. Concomitantly, I would like to propose that improvisation, and particularly free improvisation, in as much as it is not constrained by established formal structures and tonal parameters, adds to music's already established credentials as a metaphoric art form. It therefore draws music even closer to that inception point of the creative impulse. Improvisation's freedom from structural constraint, its pre-formalized nature, correlates closely to Hegel's not yet mediated being. Steiner's observation regarding abstraction further suggests that the predeterminants of aesthetic articulations are depreciative in the sense that they take us further away from the freedom of our unmediated being. So he says, representation, narrative, necessarily bears witness to the mosaic of the actual, a mosaic formally and existentially reductive. Representation is an inventory of the choices made, whereas abstraction narrates the abyss of total freedom which preceded and contained these choices. Again, this returns us to the questions regarding the specific powers of the techne mode of knowledge inquiry. I want to explore ways in which free improvisation, at its finest and most heightened moments, has the potential to transport human creativity, expression, and communication to the very borders of the Umwelt, and indeed has the potential to pierce the Umwelt, leading to an actual extension of human consciousness. The case for improvisation as a mode distinct from a written composition or text predates extensively Barthes's diatribe against authorship. Indeed, Plato looked upon the codification of philosophical thought in writing as anathema, as a danger to the power of memory and memorization. The codification in writing text, in notating music, does, it could be argued, denote a type of fabricated auctoritas, a fabricated authorship, in its automatic exclusion of alternative possibilities and thus its evasion of amendment and modification. Metaphorically carved into stone, the text, the notated score, it could be argued, enact a kind of dubious promotion of one creative option over other potentially valuable ones. The improvised moment, on the other hand, is not only ethically open to amendment and response, it further offers unique opportunities to extend the reach and breadth of insight and consciousness. Enacted within the context of communal performance, free improvisation opens up new precincts of human expression and communication that in their most executive moments can expand the boundaries of human consciousness, of human Umwelten. It is this communal context, in this communal context, that real possibilities for the expansion of Umwelten exist. Paul Cobley's positioning of interconnected Umwelts as the semiosphere opens up new ground here. As he points out, any two Umwelts, when communicating, are part of the same semiosphere. Thus, leaning on some of core ideas of biosemiotics and the semiosphere in order to understand the instantaneous phenomenon of the free improvised moment, the performance of music in this context is an intersubjective process dependent upon prescribed coalitions. It is within these prescribed coalitions where free improvisers exercise and sustain their musical knowing, where they release their embedded knowledges. It is the semiosphere of the prescribed coalition of the willing that provides free improvisers with an ethical space and a field of open potentiality where embedded musical creativity may be, in the Heideggerian sense, unconcealed. The semiosphere also encourages the intersubjective possibilities for extended creative reach. This allows individual members of the coalition not only to reveal their own creative spirit, but also to build upon the creative geist of others through the very act of instantaneous intersubjective behaviors and responses, initiations and reciprocations that allow for an extension of the collective creative impulse. In biosemiotics, this process is called scaffolding, in that it allows a creative impulse to emerge out of a previous one in an ongoing scaffolding process which results in an extension greater than the sum of its parts. While this scaffolding process may occur with an individual within the semiosphere of the free improvisation or the free improvising coalition and under the right conditions, such a process may be greatly enhanced to deliver musical results that extend beyond the anticipated reaches or even the most positive expectations of the individuals therein. Under such circumstances, extraordinary and unforeseen musical events may occur that not only offer new ways of performing and composing music, but may even extend well beyond what was thought possible. In short, such conditions may allow for transcendental moments that, in piercing the boundaries of the interconnected Umwelten of the semiosphere, have created entirely new modes of music making, entirely new modes of knowledge and knowing. Thank you.